Great. Welcome everybody to PenLUG. Tonight's presentation is by David Weekley. David has done a really interesting thing, harkening back to the early days of Silicon Valley where people created computers in their garages. David has created an internet startup with no capital and only one weekend's work. And so, even if we're just Linux hackers and we don't think we have the skills, sometimes all it really takes is a great idea. So without any further ado, let me welcome David Weekley.
Thank you all for being so patient. So, why the heck are we here? Why are we here in Silicon Valley? Well, I've heard a lot of reasons, but some things that come up pretty often are that the weather's pretty awesome. I'm from Boston. Boston's a sweet city, I love it. But man, it gets pretty cold in the winters and pretty hot in the summers. And it's just kind of always nice here. Almost as nice as Maui. There's also a lot of geeks here. A lot of people come here because where they grew up, where they are, there aren't a lot of other people like them. And they love sitting down and having geeky conversations about the latest things that have come out, about really good ideas, about really bad ideas, and they're just not getting that where they're coming in from. For instance, last weekend, we brought in a guy from DC who was desperate to talk to people who were interested in things other than politics, who wanted to figure out where he could go and engage a community of real geeks. And then he came here, I flew him over because I'm trying to recruit him for my company. And most of the recruitment wasn't trying to pitch him on equity packages or how great the company was going to be. It was taking him to an online hackathon called Super Happy Dev House, where he could go and hang out with 80 different other geeks who were busy making cool stuff. And then I saw his eyes light up. They're like, wow, I want to be here. I want to figure out how we can get more of this crack. So it's geek nirvana. And this is the only place in the world where you can find things like that on a very regular basis because there's such a concentration of geeks. So that's one reason why people are here. It's also that this area is full of possibility. And in some sense, it's part of the DNA of the Bay Area. This place was really started in the gold rush. People come out here because they think, if I work really hard, if I really exert myself, I've got a chance to make it big. And even though those people are long dead and gone, and most of the Bay Area is implants, such as myself, having grown up in Boston, even so, the DNA of the area remains the same, that of the prospector. That I've got no entitlement, but if I work very hard, if I apply myself, I might be able to make big bucks. And that stayed through. And people find it appealing.
You forgot one. People are like myself were born here. 7th generation.
That's another reason why people are here. So maybe I should have titled this one, Why Do People Come Here? Yeah. And also, why do people stay here? There might be a reason why you leave. Good point, though. So why did Silicon Valley happen? Why did things really start exploding? And I know that things began much earlier than the 70s, Hewlett-Packard and so forth, but I would say that most people here, the real explosion of it started to happen in the mid to late 70s. What was going on? Well, I'll give you my theory about what was happening, was that some of the 50s nerds who sent people into space had kids, and now they produce 70s hippie children who were smart and loved engineering and just loved to love, and they loved to share ideas. So there's a very open, expressive, sharing kind of community that got created. And if you've met the kind of folks who started the Homebrew Computer Club and the West Coast Computer Fair, you know, they were very much hippies.
I'm also an original member of the Homebrew Computer Club.
Sweet! So you can stop me where I go.
I just add if you don't mind.
Cool. And these people are alive and well and with us and helping drive the current spread of innovation. Part of what I'm going to be trying to argue here is that a lot of what we're seeing today is parallels to what we were seeing back then. Some of it's different, and some of it is the same. The very spirit of geekery and sharing ideas is very much, I would say, the same, even though I wasn't even born at that point. So what was really taking off back then? So a lot of sharing of ideas, Homebrew Computer Club, and then of commercial ideas in the case of the West Coast Computer Fair, which ended up becoming Comdex. And also, computers were beginning to become affordable. When the Altair came out, it was a big deal, because it meant that you could have your own computer to go and tinker on. Before then, computers were much larger, harder to access, took up city blocks, etc. So that was the affordability of computing is what made possible this first revolution, along with the sharing of ideas that came with the hippie mentality. And wasn't really about making the big bucks. People were just there to share. Software hadn't become a really big booming industry. Usually it was still tied with hardware, and hardware was either huge or hobbyist. So people had the philosophy of, let's just make the damn thing. It'll be cool to make it. Let's make it for making's sake. Now if we fast forward a bit, we get to the beginning of the dot-com era. In the same way that widespread computing enabled the first wave of innovation that we saw here, widespread, getting that out to everybody, really just getting that out to the mass market, and having wide access, although it was narrowband at the time, out in people's hands, gave the platform for creating the dot-com era. What also gave the platform for the dot-com era was the IPO market. So I would say this really started back in 1993 with Trip Hawkins' 3DO, which is the first company to ever go public without really having a model that had been proven yet. And traditionally, you needed several years of profitability before they would allow you to be listed on the public market. But 3DO came out, and they hadn't sold a single box that had their technology on it. They hadn't sold a single CD that had their stuff on it. And yet here they were with a $300 million IPO, and it worked. So that really changed things around. People were like, wow, maybe we can get massive liquidity because we've got a great idea, we've got the hope of being something great, versus having already proved ourselves to be something great. This was a huge change in liquidity markets. So this ended up driving VC investment because they believed that they could go with some cash, build up hype, and get early liquidity before a company had to go through the very long pipeline of actually proving itself to have found a large and viable market. If it merely looked like they might be able to enter into a large and viable market, investors could get liquidity early and big returns because technology was hot. So we saw that the dot-com era was opened by this initial wave of IPOs, starting with 3DO. And most people consider it to have ended when the IPO market for technology collapsed in 2000-2001. And in both cases, the reason why it's bookended by changes in the public market here is that investment was required for innovation. Things were really expensive to get out there. People have been sharing ideas early, but it still required a lot of money to go and deploy your idea to the world. Hardware, software, and hosting were very expensive in the mid-90s. Without capital, you couldn't actually deliver a real product. In the dot-com era, we also saw a lot of proprietary thinking. Many of you who are around for those days remember that you'd go out to lunch with somebody and talk about what they had been working on. They make you sign an NDA. There were NDAs everywhere. It was very difficult to have meaningful conversations with people. And part of the reason for this is that there was a mentality of proprietary thinking that goes along hand with the thinking around closed source. And the reason why is actually logical. It was not that these people are necessarily evil and don't feel like sharing their ideas. It was that the insane availability of capital, a short, casual stroll up Sand Hill Road, could nail you millions of dollars that you could use to actually go and launch the idea, which, with about a year and a half, 2 years of work, could end up IPOing and being worth a whole lot of money. So ideas were kept under shells because the wrong idea in the wrong person's hand could quickly make them money and you'd never see a penny, those bastards. So these were the mechanics that enabled VC. These were the mechanics that also empowered closed thinking and proprietary ideas. These people were not the geeks who were pushing this. These people were MBAs who were out here to make a buck. They'd come to the Bay Area because they saw easy money. They saw quick money. Not necessarily because they loved technology. Technology was just the venue for it. So, quick side note on IPOs. That they allow for public ownership of an idea, good. That they allow for liquidity is good. But the bad part of it is that they're often de facto pyramid schemes. Why do we see early investors getting out so quickly, especially with hot IPOs? It's because they know something that the public doesn't. They know that the idea is overvalued. This is why we saw a lot of the implosions of the IPOs that came out even in the middle of the dot-com days, such as the VA Linux IPO, which happened to pay for a semester of Stanford for me. The IPO market dried up with the Sarbanes-Oxley Act in 2002. And this act was passed in response to some of the insanity that Enron had propagated upon the public market. How many of you are familiar with Sarbanes-Oxley? Wow, cool, awesome. So basically, the short of it, since you guys already know about it, there's no need to go into detail, is that if you want to IPO, it's going to cost your company around $2 million a year in compliance fees, And you also have your CFO and your CEO personally liable for anything that the company screws up. So that also dried up the market for really quality CFOs, because they're going to do their best, but they don't want to be personally liable for what happens to the company that they didn't happen to find. So it's very hard to IPO, especially as a small company. You can imagine if your revenues are, let's say, $3, $4, $5 million a year, and you're growing strong, you think you've got a big potential future, and then you tack on $2 million a year of expenses, it's going to put a huge dent on your bottom line. Not only in terms of your runway, but also in terms of your metrics. How do your books look?
It also screws up the organization. You can't be real adaptive. You've got to be watching everything.
Because there's controls based on everything. Yeah.
You know, if you're worrying about that, you're not worrying about making your company go.
Yeah. So the public market is effectively dead at this point. And while we may hope that some of Sarbanes-Oxley's more draconian provisions get revoked, we can't really count on that anymore.
Can I interrupt for a second?
Yeah.
The pizza's here, it's going to get cold, so it'd
Okay.
probably be better if we
Quick
pause
break
the
for pizza.
presentation. So pizza break.
This area is full of... I could take lack of tact in presenting up to a new level by eating while I present, but I won't look at it. So yeah, with the IPO market dried up, a lot of the flakes left Silicon Valley. Most of you who were here around that time might have noticed that 101 had a lot less traffic than usual. Some of that was that people were staying home because they didn't have jobs anymore and were poking around for jobs. It was a tough market. But a lot of it was that the people who came here for the quick money, because their parents said, wow, looks like there's a lot of money here, you should go and get an MBA, sweetie, and make your big bucks out there, decided that all that's left around here are a bunch of hardcore Unix geeks. Ugh. And then they left them. And people who like being around hardcore Unix geeks stayed. So we got to continue the wave of innovation and geekery. And while all this was going on with the public markets, what was happening in technology is that hardware continued commoditizing. CPUs became faster and cheaper and more power efficient, although more power hungry. Disk drives became cheaper and larger and faster. Memory became largely available, and bandwidth also became very cheap because back in 99-2000, telecommunications companies spent way too much money because they all took the growth curves of the internet and put little dotted lines going forward to 2020 and said, oh my god, we need to spend tens of billions of dollars right now in order to deploy fiber absolutely everywhere. Well, it's turned out to be a good thing, but they didn't exactly get ROI on those investments. Because all those companies they were counting on to pay huge sums of money, they shoved their bandwidth over these fat pipes, ended up going bankrupt. And also, everybody else and their mother had the same idea of laying lots and lots of fiber so that they could make lots and lots of money. So they ended up doing this wild fiber glut that came out right after the boom, which meant that bandwidth also became commoditized. Open source software started to really get mature, really get popular, really get out there. We started seeing folks like MySQL pop up to offer viable alternatives to Oracle and so forth. And all of a sudden, across the board, we were seeing commoditization of the things that you need to go and deploy a networked idea to the world. So, what's amazing now? This brings us up to the present day. And that's that execution is so unfreaking believably cheap. Almost every aspect of the platform of delivering ideas to the end user are solved and close enough to free that your operating costs basically don't matter. Now, I'm not going to use this blithely. There are a lot of people who spend millions and millions of dollars on monthly infrastructure costs and operations and so forth. But those are usually companies that are making billions and billions of dollars. Well, except for in the case of YouTube. But they're pretty much free open source LAMP stack, along with commoditized hardware, has just made it really ridiculously easy to deploy your ideas out to the world. For instance, most data sets that are really interesting, that don't involve rich media, I would posit, are less than 16 gig. That's not all of them. There's a lot of interesting data sets that are more than 16 gig. But the huge majority of them are less than 16 gig. Now why is this interesting? Why do I say 16 gig? Well, it's the amount of memory you can pretty casually toss into a dual Opteron box and just keep cache there in RAM just in case you need it. This is exactly what companies like Facebook do. They keep very fast, accessible indices of every college student in the United States. And soon, they hope, every person in the United States. Execution has also become a lot easier on the software side, as we've noticed that development tools, development libraries, the environments for going and creating new products has continued to make things easy, and recently especially, fun. So we're seeing Ruby on Rails, we're seeing Prototype, we're seeing these environments that are fun to use, that are mature, that have more robust debugging environments than previously. And so development itself is faster and is cheaper. We're also seeing commoditization in terms of browser-level JavaScript. I know there are horrible, horrible tweaks and quirks that exist in a lot of these browsers. Even IE7, even Firefox, there's little things they do wrong. They haven't completely implemented the standards exactly correctly, and it's a pain in the ass. So I don't want to try and gloss over that too much, but it's getting to the point where it's reasonably enough solid, it's reasonably enough consistent, that you can start to count on this like a platform, like you would an operating system. And the JavaScript libraries that sit across these cross browsers, such as Prototype and Scriptalicious and so forth, are starting themselves to get a certain amount of maturity to where you can count on these calls generally working in most cases. So I would posit that this is a trigger for the third revolution. The trigger for the first revolution was the availability of purchasable computers at all. The trigger for the second revolution was that pretty much everyone had a computer, and enough people had narrowband, or some form of internet connectivity to make it interesting. And at this point, where we're at, is that pretty much everybody has got a JavaScript-capable browser with reasonable capabilities, and is either on broadband or moving there within the next couple of years. So this creates a trigger point for a whole platform of stuff to come out. And that's what we've seen with this insane Web 2.0 bubble that's emerged within the last year and a half, 2 years. Finally, and this is a really important point that people I think don't give enough credence to, is that monetization is actually possible now in ways that it wasn't in the original dot-com boom days back in '95. Not only are we finding that the mechanics of monetizing a site in terms of AdSense, PayPal, direct credit card processing even, are much easier than they were in '95. Much, much, much easier to go and set up and process and start receiving money, but also this is matched by consumers being willing to actually spend money on this stuff. If you launched some of these companies, like PBWiki, my very own company, back in '98, '99 or so forth, there was so much that was available for free, and even without advertising at the time, that consumers were not willing to open their wallets. They were not willing to open their wallets for almost anything except for, well, books, physical things, things that people would actually go and buy. So what's new is that it's easy for people to go, for companies to process payments, to get started quickly, and people are actually willing to do it. And this is huge because that means you can actually start making money. So what's different from the first computer revolution? Homebrew Computer Club met about once every 2 weeks, is that right? To discuss ideas and what had changed. And that was incredible at the time because the state of the universe would be different every 2 weeks, and you need to go and do a checkpoint there, right? And so that was heady times, crazy, crazy times. What we're seeing now is that implementation has become so lightweight that actually at events, things are being implemented. Not discussed, but in the actual course of the event, new things are being created and launched, which I think would have been hard to conceive of back in the days, because there was so much involved in actually deploying something new. So you can have an idea for a company, you can think it up, you can work with a designer who's at an event, but you can register the domain name, you can put it up, you can deploy it out to a bunch of blogs, and by the time you've left to go home for the night, you're starting to get your company's first traffic. It's kind of ridiculous, but this is the kind of world that we're coming to live in. You take a look at how information is shared. Back in the day, the annual West Coast Computer Fair, where companies could go and present what they had worked on in the previous year, here in California. Now we're seeing all across the world these little bar camps where people go and share since the last bar camp that they had, the new things that they've come up with. It's a very informal sharing mechanism, a very informal knowledge sharing system that's emerged. And it's on a completely different scope than it was before. So what does all this mean? It means that unimplemented talk is cheap. Because implementation has gotten easier, if you haven't gone ahead and actually implemented the idea is either really heavyweight, or more often is it wasn't actually interesting enough to you to go ahead and implement. Part of this means that idea sharing becomes a lot easier because either it's a portfolio of things you've already created that you can show people, or it's a bunch of ideas that you didn't think were worth implementing. So that's part of the reason why I believe NDAs have become less a systemic part of modern Silicon Valley culture, is because the class of ideas that would be easy to run away with and make a whole lot of money on is actually kind of evaporated. And part of that is that the actual first step of the execution is where the value is, and that part has gotten easy. So, the fact that it's going to be very easy to launch new ideas means that we're going to see a lot of ideas. And wouldn't you know it, most of these ideas are going to be very, very bad. It's the same thing with blogs, right? When blogs were first coming out, people wondered, okay, so now we'll have every teenager in America writing their daily journal on the internet. Like, oh my God, the internet is dead, right? There's going to be all this terrible, terrible content. And you know what? They were right. It's true. There was terrible, terrible content. There's going to be more terrible, terrible content. You look at the average MySpace page and you probably want to go and poke your eyes out. It's awful, but that's fine. Because in addition to being able to collect huge quantities of data from people, most of which is bad, we've also developed our ability to filter, to go and block out the crap and pick out and highlight and point out the stuff that's really, really awesome. The gems that emerge from being able to deal with everybody throwing in their 2 cents into the pool. Because some of those posts, even by angstful teenagers somewhere in North Carolina, end up containing gems. Things that really add to the level of human knowledge, to add to the discourse of our understanding of our existence on this planet. Or maybe a small bit of a technical implementation. That's a little aha that you get. So this is why things like Dig and so forth have evolved. To be able to filter out the crap information and highlight and bring to a larger audience really awesome bits of information. So there's going to be a lot of these terrible ideas, but there's also going to be awesome filtering mechanisms for highlighting the ones that are great. And it's a very cost-effective exploration of the question, what do people find useful that we can implement with a computer, that we can serve with a web browser? So we're getting very capital efficient. If we can get to the point where we've got a swarm of small companies starting up almost weekends to go and explore what can people do, what do people find useful, and most of those answers are wrong. No, actually, that's retarded. Nobody would ever do that. No, actually, people aren't going to want to go in and click on those things just to be able to go to the bathroom, to track how much time they're spending in the bathroom. It's a bad idea, right? But these things are taking a lot less capital back than they did in the dot-com days. In the dot-com days, there were a lot of bad ideas in the hope that some of them would stand up as good ideas. But they took big teams. They took years to roll out. They ate up millions, tens of millions, in some cases, hundreds of millions of investor dollars. But all advantage, right? Bad idea. Let's give people money for looking at ads while they surf the web. I know nobody will ever abuse that, right? Just bad, bad idea. But it took a lot of resources to scope that out. So we weren't doing an efficient job as a human species of finding out those ideas that made sense and that were helpful. By reducing the friction that it takes to launch an idea, we're becoming more efficient as a species. And we're going to find ourselves iterating more and more quickly. And I've got to stop myself here before I turn to Rick Kurzweil. So, another important bit here is that there's no VC that's necessarily required for this cycle because the startup costs are largely your smarts and your time. So, that begs the question, what if you never will be able to IPO for $100 million? What if, probabilistically, you're not going to get bought for $100 million either? Because as much as everyone would like to be bought out, to hit some big liquidity event, to be bought by a big company and make a whole lot of money all of a sudden, like, wow, Mom, I'm a millionaire. It's probably not going to happen. There's only so many companies that Yahoo, AOL, Google, Time Warner, etc. can go and buy. People don't really realize this. This last weekend, I had the opportunity to sit in on a general partners meeting that was evaluating new ideas pitched to them. And I was terrified by the number of companies that pitched an investment in their company based on a proposed liquidity event of an acquisition by Google. That can't drive a market. And that's kind of obvious when you say it like that, because Google can only acquire so many companies a year, and it's got an unbelievable amount of cash. It's got $8 billion of cash in the bank, a market cap that exceeds God. But You can only buy so many companies that way. Let's say they spend $2 billion a year in acquisitions. How does that compare to the public markets? How does that compare to the public markets? There's no money there. You're probably not going to get it. So what if we sit back and we deal with these harsh realities? The fact that you're not going to be able to IPO and cash out for big money, that you're probably not going to get bought for $100 million. What if you don't run your company like a lottery ticket? What if you have to actually make revenues? What if you actually have a bottom line? Maybe that's okay. In the past, these companies were derided as lifestyle companies. Oh, yeah, I guess you're making a lifestyle company. Good luck with that, right?
Have fun with that.
Right. It's really, you get the pejorative pat on the head from the investors, right? If you even start talking about that kind of thing. But my friends Jim and James started a company called hotornot.com that you could use to go in and rate how attractive you thought people of a gender of your choice were. And at some point, they came up with the idea, well, we're getting a lot of traffic. I bet we could make some money if we add a button that says, click here to meet me, underneath pictures of people, and you charge people $3 for the ability to send that person a message. $3, right? So they launched it, they put it out there. 8 days later, they were a profitable company, have been ridiculously profitable since. The name of their company is 8 Days Incorporated. Now, they've been running that site now for years, actually. And they're both of them doing very, very well. I was invited to one of their parties recently up at their new offices in San Francisco. They've got, 10 employees or so, like really pimp kind of a setup. And they haven't pulled in venture capital. They're making this money from people who are wanting to send hot other people messages. And the fact that their operational costs were so low let them run this at a profit, and actually they're both doing very, very well because of it. So, if your company only makes $2 million a year, which is some laughable, trivial sum, let's not even talk about your hopes of getting into the Fortune 5,000, let alone 50,000. What if it's just 2 people? What if you've got no overhead? Then it's $2 million divided by 2 a year. I can live with that. And I bet most people could more than live with that. There's another factor that's coming in here as well. There is a black hole for A-quality talent in Silicon Valley right now. And raise your hand if you realize that you've been bit by this recently. No? Okay.
Different company.
So, what I've been saying, and what a lot of my peers have been saying also, is that there are these giant black holes, these giant sucking holes of talent, including Google, Intel, NVIDIA, and Yahoo. They're taking a lot of the A-list talent because it's very easy. If you're low risk, you're coming out of a university almost anywhere, and you're looking for a safe bet. You're looking for a nice 6-figure job, lots of options, lots of benefits. It's going to be an obvious choice to go to one of these big companies. We've also seen a bit of failure in terms of outsourcing, especially on the smaller end. If you're just starting out, it's going to be very difficult for you to engage a quality outsourcing firm and get the kind of results that you need. What you need when you're just launching a product is a lot of back and forth, a lot of direct team interaction. You'd be meeting face to face. And I haven't seen outsourcing do a great job at this startup kind of a level. The A-list coders are not really trawling around for jobs. They're not sitting in their underwear drinking beer, watching TV, and casually surfing around the job boards to see if anybody will, please God, anybody will hire them. These people are probably hired right now, and they're probably happy right now because they're desired, supply and demand. The interesting part about this, the part that I want to drive in here, is that money doesn't necessarily mean that a competitor that might rise up has an ability to compete against you.
We lost a young engineer to Google. We paid him 2.5 times what we were paying him. It's hard to make a counteroffer.
Sometimes it may. There are certainly going to be a number of examples like that. But I suppose you would say that it is my hope for the Valley that there's enough of a safety net. If you're here as an engineer, you know you're not going to starve. You know there are enough people who need your services that you can step out, you can take a risk, and you can do the thing that you want to do, versus to take the soft, cushy job. VC great back in the dot-com days. And part of it was that they could leverage their investment, they could spread it out, and that way they could make for a big hit. It was very similar to the record industry, where you go and you launch 20 bands, and most of them flop badly, nobody ever hears about them. A couple of them pay for themselves and then some, and then there's like one that just so dominates everything else that it makes the entire endeavor worth it. They can spread out their risk. But it sucks for an entrepreneur, because the entrepreneur can't spread out their risk. The entrepreneur would start a company, spend a couple of years at it, probabilistically, it wouldn't go well. 1 in 12 companies made it through to a liquidity event. Even with that, if you went and started another company, spent another couple of years at it, probabilistically, you wouldn't succeed. And at that point, you're through really the richest part of your startup career. If you're really diligent, you can just keep on hammering at it, and go through and do 12 startups and hope that one of them will succeed. That starts getting really brutal, though. I mean, the VCs are expecting this kind of huge return in 4 years, 5 years, 6 years. In extreme cases, 8 years. That's how long your funds are. But lightweight launching means that entrepreneurs can now talk about launching 20 companies within their career, instead of launching 1 company, instead of launching 2 companies. This means that as an entrepreneur, you can begin to hedge your risk. You can go and spend a weekend, try out an idea, put it out there, and you know what? Probably it'll suck. Probably nobody will be interested. Probably it'll go away. That's okay, it's a weekend. Maybe even spend a week doing it. Try and make it nice, polish it up a little bit. You know, and it'll probably not work. But if you can start doing that on a regular basis, if you can launch a lot of different ideas, one of them is going to go and take off. So you start getting empowered as an entrepreneur with the same sort of leverage that VCs had that made VC great. So where is all this going? Where is Web 2.0 headed? And the way that I see it is that there's going to be huge ecosystems around every kind of data interaction, manipulation, and transit. We're going to see calendars, maps, text collaboration, real-time messaging, social and business networking, and all different kinds of media. There's going to be universes there, where there's lots of little players who are tying into this universe, who are adding a certain amount of information, who are adding a certain amount of processing. Now, it used to be that in order for you as a third party to come in and really be helpful, you needed to own that bit of technology. You needed to have bought that bit of technology. It needed to be all under one roof, the portal strategy, right? But even companies like Yahoo and Google, who are running these portal strategy companies, are realizing that that's going to be a small subset of what is possible. That if they open themselves up to be glued into, to be plugged into any sort of a system, that's a much larger and richer possibility for what could be created. And this is part of the reason why we're seeing the emergence of mashups. Where I think things are going is that there's going to be a million niches for what people need, and there's going to be a million tiny companies serving these people. Not 3 companies, not 4 companies, not 5 companies, not 1 company. A million little companies taking part in an ecosystem where there's no opportunity that is too small. If somebody finds a market that's worth $800,000 a year, in the old model, the market would simply be ignored. There was no way that you could go and pursue that. But once your operational costs come down, once you can go and actually meaningfully run a company with 1, 2, 3 people, a market that is only worth $800,000 a year starts becoming viable to go after. Which means these people are being served in ways they've never been served before, because the technology has afforded them the opportunity.
Question. What about copycats? Why doesn't somebody put up another hot or not and drive you out of business? How is that dealt with?
Some of it is branding, some of it is network effect. In the case of hot or not, you want to go to the place that has all the hot people of your gender of choice, right? And so if the first site that comes out there that garners the largest group of people considered to be hot is probably going to win out. It's going to be difficult for a new site to emerge after that first site comes out. I think we are going to see the continuance of first mover advantage in terms of if you're really the first to go and do something, then word about you spreads, and copycats, the word doesn't spread quite as well. The benefit, I mean, where this really comes in is that copycats, in my opinion, struck worse when the original inventor did not have the same level of broadcast as the copier. So if you came out with a cool idea, and like you told 2 of your friends, but those friends weren't really networky kind of people, and then I saw your idea a few months later and I stole it, and then I broadcast it all over the primetime TV, then I could very effectively steal your idea. But the blog buzz that we're seeing these days with exploding ideas out means that it's going to be more challenging, definitely not impossible, but more challenging to come out with a copied idea and claim that you were first. The people are going to recognize the first company that came out as really being the first. That said, does it happen? Absolutely.
There's an unusual side market in the cottage industry. People want to do craft. I know the woman has about 20 customers. She makes custom diapers.
Okay. And she's making a good living?
Yes, yes, and she has people who want to get on her list.
That's awesome.
You know, and so if you're doing crafts, you know, you go to these weekend art fairs and that, it's expensive to do, it's tough. That's a hard goods thing that I think will also be.
And the key part there is that what enables that is like FedEx, DHL,
Oh,
right?
yeah,
UPS,
absolutely.
and the internet. So that somebody who's making the world's best custom diapers can go and connect with her audience. Because if she was just in a small town, I bet she'd have a very hard time to live with that. Yeah. So it's like in America, a very, very common last name, like almost the ultimate common last name, Smith, right? Like if you were a blacksmith, if you lived in a town, the town would need a blacksmith. And you had to turn out very common standardized things. You had to like know how to go and beat out a horseshoe. In the modern economy, that's kind of meaningless because you can just make a horseshoe manufacturing factory, right? And so mass creation ends up becoming commoditized, but then custom creation ends up finding its niche market globally. And if it can do it for custom diapers, how much more can it do it for a product that can be delivered instantaneously over the wire anywhere in the world? Chinese is our #2 language at PBWiki, and we've got a huge number of people coming in from Taiwan to use our service. There's no way in heck that a small group of 20-year-olds putting together a little endeavor could have, in any other time in the world, created a product that was used on a regular basis by Taiwanese. Almost casually. So what kind of factors are going to enable this constellation of companies, this constellation of technologies? There's a couple different key pieces, and I probably missed some of them. You can argue about some of these as well. But I think the main points are that we get structured data interchange, that data is meaningfully transmitted between different computational nodes on the network. So that I can hand you my calendar, and that's meaningful. So that you can take your calendaring program and then do something interesting with that and pull out events that you find interesting and then send on that calendaring feed somewhere else. And you can manipulate these structured flows of information. But in order to do that, you need to have APIs. You need to have some form of structured data standard. Like, I say XML for form, although I don't love XML, but JSON also works quite well. And then you get standards in which that data is encapsulated, such as RSS, Atom, and web count. And I hope to God we're going to see more of these standards come out. There are a lot of standards in GIS, for instance, and I hope that people start really narrowing down and common standards get created for that. And everybody seems to have their own in that industry. Another key part here is embeddability. They can pull in content without even knowing how to render it into different services. So Google Gadgets is a good representation of this, as making it very easy to go and take information that might be structured information like the weather or a spreadsheet, anything like that, and pull it into, let's say, a blog. And the software that displays the blog may have no idea whatsoever about spreadsheets. But a little bit of HTML says go and pull in this JavaScript code, pull in this data, knows how to render a little spreadsheet, the blog gets a spreadsheet in it. And the person who authored the blog software, and the person who authored the blog don't have to have any idea how it was done at all. And that's kind of amazing. That's starting to enable a constellation of these little bits and pieces of information. And there may be a theme here that starts to sound familiar to Unix geeks. Small pieces of information loosely joined. Lots of little small tools that just do one or two things well, and then connected together via pipes. Only in the case of Unix, we very literally meant pipes. And here, we need network pipes. The final final part of enabling the constellation, I believe, is going to make it is the continued progress towards making it even easier to go and launch new services. Things that take care of problems like your hard drive having a finite size, like your CPU having finite speed, like you having a finite amount of bandwidth. Also, generalized platforms like, hey, I want to have a blog for my company that's not doing blogging software. You can grab a piece of blogging software that's out there. I need to have email, so I can be able to handle email support. PBWiki handles all of its support with Gmail. Could we have used Siebel? Is that the right answer? Yeah, but we don't have a 6-figure budget for support email. So we set up a Gmail account, and we have everyone who's helping out with support log into the Gmail account. It doesn't cost us a penny. We're going to see an increasing proliferation of these kind of tools and platforms that are going to continue to make it easy to launch products within the constellation. What's missing? I don't think we're there yet. I don't think we're at the utopia point yet. I think there's some very critical bits of technology that have yet to be implemented, that have yet to be agreed on. One thing that's been discussed recently, just at the Web 2.0 conference this week, the MySQL CEO brought this up, that there are not standards for common data repositories to make data universally accessible and joinable, especially in the case of GIS data. So if you want to go, and let's say you're in Google Earth, and you want to pull down population charts by country. You want to map that against, I don't know, acid rain, right? You want to pull in total rainfall. You want to pull in where are centers of pollution. You want to start overlaying these things and messing with them. And a lot of that kind of data, that kind of GIS data, is locked up in a very proprietary mindset, using programs that where the code alone costs tens of thousands of dollars, in programs like ArcGIS and so forth. Now there are movements that are starting to create open standards for this, that are starting to create open ways to go and process this data and access this data. But it's very far from a solved problem today, which means that, how many of you in this room know what GIS is? Okay, great, of course you're a bunch of geeks. So, but we're not seeing a proliferation of GIS companies out there. And I think the reason why that is because they're being held back by not having common access to data repositories. Another key piece that's missing here is obvious multi-site authentication. Now, a lot of people have tried. God knows Microsoft tried with Passport. And now we've got new, lightweight, not really authentication, but it sort of identifies you as a user, maybe OpenID. And we have APIs also coming out from Microsoft again. And by the way, their APIs only work if you're running them on a Windows server. Yahoo's got a great authentication API that's out. Google, at some point, they use it internally. And AOL, with their screen name login, has been trying this. So you can log in with your AIM handle and your AIM password on any website. There's a lot of folks who have been trying this, but there's not an obvious go-to. There's not one that everybody uses, where it's just like, okay, look, I don't care about getting you as a specifically registered user, setting up a username and a password for my system. I want to know your password. I don't care what your password is. I want to know that you are a unique human, because I don't want bots registering on me. And ideally, I'd like some way to contact you if you allow me to via email, so I can let you know when there's been some big update on my site. But I don't care about storing your password, and I shouldn't have to care. But the fact of the matter is that today I still have to care. So this is something that's a big missing piece, and a lot of work needs to be done before this gets to be answered. I think we've got a good 5 years to go before there's a really good answer here. We're going to see individual companies screen. Like Facebook's got a great API for authenticating against Facebook. We might roll it in at PBWiki. So make it so a teacher can roll out to their students and say just log in with your Facebook ID. Be pretty cool. And they've made that easy, but that's specific. That's like, that only covers the Facebook. That's lame. I want to cover everyone. And there isn't a clear way to do that. Finally, there's also ways to make it easy to automatically discover a web services API and to get its documentation. I didn't mean to write discovery and automation, I meant to write discovery and documentation. I'll fix that. Now, SOAP tried to solve this, right? This isn't a problem that people have not tried to solve, but SOAP is pretty yuck. Part of the reason why it didn't take off, in my opinion, it was very hard to debug. The fact that you can debug REST with a web browser and a location bar makes it very, very compelling. Much more compelling than SOAP. So even though SOAP made a certain amount of sense, it never really took off. We need to have better tools for automatically discovering APIs that exist on web services and their documentation, not automation I screwed up. So there's also, it's hard to take an implementation of an idea that works for 3 users and seamlessly scale it up to work for 30 million users. Currently, you need to do a lot of back-end engineering to go and partition things out, to make things horizontally partitionable, to migrate from your virtual hosting account that you have with DreamHost for $3 a month, up to a dedicated server at Rackspace, and then all the way up to having like your cluster of 5 computers that you have hosted at Hurricane Electric, finally all the way up to having like 5 racks of equipment up at 365 Main. Right? There's a lot of really big leaps that need to happen there. That doesn't necessarily need to be the case. Ideally, from the programmer's perspective, everything looks like it's on a single box. If I connect to a database, if I insert a row, if I select from a row, I shouldn't have to care that that's a master-master replication setup that's, that on this pair of machines that I had to create here, that it's got automated failover in the application layer so that if this data center goes down, it'll just seamlessly go and try to perform SQL statements over here. I don't want to have to care about that. I want to care about selecting my data from the database. And we're starting to get there. People are working on these things. I'm not saying that things are hopeless, but I'm saying we're not really there yet. We haven't arrived yet to the point where it's very easy to seamlessly scale things out from 3 users to 30 million users, and things will get there in my opinion. There are some serious long-term challenges that the Valley faces as well. One big problem is a fear that I am myself helping come to fruition, and that's the everything goes to zero philosophy. And the concern there is that if it's true that ideas can be launched so cheaply and run so cheaply, it's possible that some of those people launching and running ideas may do so with no hope for profit, with no hope for commercial engagement. Maybe they won't put ads on it, maybe they won't charge for anything, maybe they'll just run it because it'll be fun to run. And at the point where, maybe serving 20,000 people a month costs you $5, you can just make sure to mow the lawn once a month and hey, you've paid for services for those people. And I feel swell about that. Because by day, I do this totally other thing and I'm running this service for fun. So you can get operations that might be strictly charity supported, or they're done just for the good brand name it brings to give somebody a service for free. I was recently talking with a guy who started a company called Charles Chocolates. They make super premium chocolate up in San Francisco. And I was asking him, what would you do if 98% of the people who got your chocolate and ate your chocolate didn't pay for your chocolate, right? And what would you do if a competitor came into the market who simply gave away all of their chocolate for free? It's a real challenge. And so it's possible that at the point that the cost of running a lot of these services goes to zero, that people will choose for either charity or for market reasons to offer them for free and delete the market so that there's no market for direct commercialization. That's going to be a real challenge. I don't really have a glib answer for you on how to prevent that from happening. It may prove long-term very challenging to compete with an active open source project with a whole lot of developers hosted on a very low-cost infrastructure. And with everyone just doing this for fun, just doing this in their free time as volunteers, because it seems like a good thing to do. So, finally, there are some scalability problems. Pretty much all of these other aspects of the hardware platform, in terms of storage, in terms of memory, in terms of bandwidth, I believe are fairly close to solved problems. But CPU is not. Because you could always process the data a little bit better to get a better understanding of what it is the user wants to look at. It's not really a bounded problem. So how do you scale computation? Well, you need to parallelize, obviously, because it's pretty clear that some of the chip manufacturers are giving up on the speed component of Moore's Law, at least, and are trying to go multi-core. We just saw Intel release their quad-core architecture, and now on fairly casual servers, you can have 2 sockets, each of which have a quad-core processor, and now I've got 8 cores. Oh, and you turn on hyper-threading, and I've got 16 virtualized cores that I can go and program against. Well, you have to be writing your programming code a little bit differently that way. And there are some problems that parallelize well and some problems that don't. It's going to be really interesting to see how some of these problems that don't parallelize well end up getting solved in this way. And of course, NVIDIA just a few days ago launched their new graphics cards that, by the way, are also incredibly fast general purpose processors and come with their own language to write general purpose programming code against those processors. But it's incredibly parallelized is the real power of it. Like if you've got a very parallelized application, you might be able to get incredible speed by going and running on one of these GPUs. Crazy, crazy thought. But if it's not, that's not going to help you. If your application is not parallelizable, then it's not going to help you to go to a massively parallelized infrastructure, something like the Google farm, where you've got 500,000 different computers that are all running your code at once. So that's going to be a long-term challenge for certain classes of problems.
There's no good theoretical underpinning for parallelism. It's like a lot of AI, it's domain specific,
Yeah.
which is what NVIDIA's done. And there are some mathematical things you can do, but there just hasn't been very much successful parallelism. And I was an analyst at DataQuest 20 years ago looking at it, and it's not much further. I don't think it really is. Not in theory. If you don't have good theory,
How are you going to have good practice on it? Yeah.
Well, the types of companies you're talking about that are growing, how much does CPU actually become a factor in those types of companies?
That's what we're doing. We're doing social networking, witness Friendster to get it wrong. Part of the reason why Facebook, in my opinion, did well is because they virtually segmented people. So into your alma mater. It's just an arbitrary sort of slice, but it was a way of slicing the data that let you scale. Friendster didn't really come up with a good way of scaling things.
CPU driven then?
Depends on the operation. If you want shortest path, like show me all the different ways that I might know this person, then yeah, that's CPU driven. But certainly depends on the problem. I think that for a certain class of the kind of ideas that are even implementable at a small scale, if they scale greater than ON with the number of participants in the system, then CPU ends up, by definition, becoming a bottleneck. And I think there's a very large class of very interesting problems that scale worse than order n, that people in this room are going to want to solve. So there are a couple things that geeks should avoid in this universe, in my opinion. And there's a couple of problems that I've seen with very, very smart people shooting themselves in the foot very badly. One is intellectual masturbation, and that's creating things that are really incredibly cool without any actually justifiably useful purpose. There's people who enjoy writing their own operating system, their own database system, their own language. If you want to do that as a hobby and for fun, that's great. If you're actually trying to help the world, if you're actually trying to help people, please don't do this. The worst part is if you're not really having fun doing it, but you're convincing yourself that you're having to write this operating system over from scratch because it's needed in order to provide this useful thing for people. Well, I know you maybe convinced yourself of it, but you're probably wrong. So please think about it, because other people spend a lot of time who are almost as smart as you making operating systems and databases and languages. So just use what's there. Be pragmatic. Don't make the thing that's insanely perfect, that's insanely elegant, because you'll never end up actually releasing it, and you won't end up actually helping people. So the second point here is that people over-featurificationize things. That should be translatable into German pretty easily, right? People love adding features, and they don't want to launch until it's got this feature, because, oh, this feature is going to be the really key thing that's going to go and drive things. Oh, this feature is going to be really important for people to really get the full use of the system. And so people end up creating these systems that are incredibly complex before they even hit launch point. What you really want to do is you want to figure out what is my user trying to do and make it as brutally simple as it could possibly be, and anyone justifiably understand how it could be useful at all. If you think that there might be one person out there who, in this incredibly minimalist state, could find that useful, then you should go ahead and launch it. You should put it out there. And finally, and I touched on this briefly, that which you launch should not be the 7th rewrite of your software. And Brett and I, Darren and I experienced a little bit of this at a company that was in stealth mode beta for 5.5 years.
Stop here, the Xanadu project,
Yes.
17 years, and
Because it's not ready yet. We're almost. We're working on it.
Einstein and Bohr both had some very caustic things to say about elegance. Basically considered a waste of time.
Yeah. If you're looking to change the world, you need to be out in the world, actually launching things. So what are some lessons that you might learn? Well, one is to leverage other people's work, use open source, steal like heck, because other people are clever and may occasionally come up with good ideas. So you should steal them, wherever possible. You should use knowledge from others in addition to code from others. Like, how many of you guys have seen Brad Fitzpatrick's live journal presentation? Okay, you guys should read this because it's freaking awesome. We'll send out a hyperlink to it afterwards. Okay. It basically describes how this one very clever, fairly humble guy, Brad Fitzpatrick, went from running this write-your-own-journal online system that had a handful of users on it, and it sort of ran on a shared account, like the DreamHost account I was explaining to you guys, all the way up to like a multi-tier giant architecture with all sorts of custom pieces of enterprise-level software that he had to build, in the process of keeping his system from burning down. And it's really fascinating to read how he got there step by step by step by step. And it's very fast to read through. It'll take you about like 10-15 minutes. So use that kind of knowledge from others. Find other people who are going through the same problems that either you're in the middle of or you think are likely that you're going to have to go through. If you need to buy the O'Reilly book, buy the O'Reilly book. Find it on a website, find it in PDF. Ask other people if they know. If you don't know, if you can't find it, if you can't Google it, be like, hey, I'm having this terrible issue. What do you guys think? Don't say, I'm smart, I can figure it out on my own. I'm smart, I'll just go and plow through this. I'm sure it's not as hard as I've been making it out to be. You know, I'll just spend another week on this and then like I'm sure I'm going to get it at that point. No! Steal other people's stuff. Save yourself time. Don't build it yourself. If you could possibly use it, any other piece of something that's already out there that works, whether it's open source, whether it's commercial, whether it's an idea or a white paper, whatever, just steal the damn thing and use it so you can get your idea done, so you can get it out there. Make it sustainable. You have to enjoy what you're doing. So, do fun things. Find out how to make one of them pay. Try a lot of different ideas and see if you can monetize one of them. And be super cheap. Use commodity everything. And that includes languages. So I know Objective Camel is pretty freaking awesome, but you shouldn't use it. You should use something that's commodity, something brutal, something terrible and terribly fast, like PHP. I said it. You should also, as I mentioned earlier, release early, release often. This is a mantra from the open source community, of course. Getting over that perfectionist streak, and getting it in your users' hands because you think you know what they need, you think you know why they came to you, and you actually don't. Your intuitions about who they are, about how they are using your product, are probably wrong. So you need to get it into their hands as fast as possible so that you don't go down the wrong path too far, so that your users can correct you and say, what were you thinking? It's actually this that I need. Finally, you should make structured I/O as easy as possible. If you're in the middle of working on a system right now, and I know many of you in this room are, you should make sure that it's really easy to put structured information into your system, put information into your system, and to grab information out from your system. Because if you can't do that, then you're surrounded by these conversations. You're existing in this constellation, and you're not connected to any of them. The Jesuit priest Pierre Teilhard had a great vision for where the world was going. When he first saw telegraphy in I think it was the 20s, the 1920s. And he envisioned that all of humankind was as a single organism, each person as a cell, as a neuron within this organism. And he called the whole thing the noosphere, one word, N-O-O sphere. If you're not connected to others, if your information is not going back and forth between the node of your invention and other people's invention, then you are an island. You are a cancer in that body. You are disconnected. You're not helping. But if you are connected through, you don't even know to what other nodes you may be connected if you are connectable. You don't know how people are going to use your awesome little Lego piece to build a pretty cool castle. So you should make sure in the system that you're making now to make sure that I/O is easy. Finally, you should just go ahead and do that thing that you're thinking of. Google employees get 20% of their time to go and work on fun little projects that they feel like working on. But most people who work elsewhere, folks like almost everybody else in Silicon Valley, don't necessarily have that time set aside. You get home and you're tired, you've been working in front of a computer all day long, you're probably not super feeling like firing up your computer, and your weekend you've got these other projects to do. But you should just go ahead and do it, because it's possible that nobody else is going to do that idea that you've got in your head. And it's easier than ever for you to go to deploy your idea. So I grew up in a suburb of Boston, and I started programming at the age of 5. My dad had an Apple IIc in the house, you know, one of the green and black screens. And I started by typing in the column in the back. I went to Stanford. I got my Bachelor's of Science in Computer Science in 2000. I plausibly wrote the first English language description of what MP3 was, and got very involved in that whole movement, which was kind of interesting. I worked for a large company, worked for Legato before they got bought by EMC. And for fun in my free time, I ported the company's product to OS X, for which they bitched me out and then got a couple tens of millions of dollars of contracts for. At which point I realized that at some point I was going to need to start my own company to be able to recognize the value I was creating. And I also worked for a small company, along with some of the other people in this room, called There.com, where I went from being one of the hotshot programmers at this big, stupid Dilbert-like corporation to being an absolute bottom rung on the totem pole, the dumbest guy in the room. And that was it was a very humbling and awesome experience. And then after that, I left that company to go and start my own company. And without even really having a solid idea of what I was going to go and do, thought I was going to do online project management, looked into that market for 2 months, decided that'd be stupid, launched an instant messaging product, worked real hard on that all by myself for a year and a half, poured my love and my energy into that product, wrote amazing, patentable things that nobody else has ever written before, and nobody cared. Launched it, 5,000 people used it, 500 people stayed around on a regular basis, wasn't growing, nobody was telling their friends, because they couldn't understand what the hell it was. It wasn't a website, and it wasn't a download. And so right away, people's eyes started to get glassy. They were like, I don't get it. And one weekend, at the first Super Happy Dev House, which is these all-night programming parties that I helped throw, of which there have been 13 now, I started working on this idea I had for super easy to set up private wikis. And I was going to call it Peanut Butter Wiki, or PB Wiki, because it would be as easy to make a wiki as a sandwich. So I launched it just as a side project, not thinking anything would come of it, after 7 hours of development, soup to nuts. 2 days after that, I had 1,000 people using the service. I guess I need to pay attention to this. I went full-time on it, and that was about a year and a half ago. At this point, we're the largest wiki host on the internet, with over 130,000 wikis, and over 1 million pages of user-generated content. We're competing against people who have pulled down $5.5 million of venture capital. And we're larger than they are. And we've got the entire development team in the room right now.
All right.
We're also quite possibly the only wiki company to this calendar year announce a profitable quarter. Nobody else is even starting down that path.
So the part about 2 guys and 2 humans was about really quick.
It's something I've had intimate experience with.
Oh, 3 guys.
Yeah.
The girl.
So, is that what you...
Yeah.
Okay. Cool. Any other questions? Okay, great. Thanks so much, everybody.